I am under the Chapter 14 of class materials. This video provides you an introduction to the meeting management subject as we treat it in this class, and also a setup for introduction to the Borough Bank meeting management activity discussion board you're going to be doing for this week. I'm going to be landing in two documents, this meeting management PowerPoint and then this cheat sheet solution, which essentially pulls out some key points from the PowerPoint. So the first and biggest thing I want to just get off right off the bat is this is not a discussion of meeting management as you would get, like you would get normally in a meetings class where or a book material where you would learn about how to facilitate a meeting, effective facilitation techniques and tools, how to get everybody involved, how to stay on track, and all those kinds of things. There's a little bit of that, but really this is very different. This is material that I've never seen in a textbook, and I had to learn it by watching highly effective managers and leaders, and it's some things that I wished I'd known long before I did. And so the point of departure here is I'm going to suggest to you that when it comes to meetings, and in particular meetings where you are either having to make a decision within the group in the meeting or solve a problem, and also meetings where maybe you're presenting findings or information. But in those kinds of meetings, I'm going to suggest that most of those meetings succeed or fail before you ever have them. And that's based on what you've done before the meeting. And what we're also going to talk about here is that what happens before and after a meeting is at least as important, oftentimes, is what happens during a meeting in those settings. And so that's what we're talking about here. And let me show you, this PowerPoint has a lot of ink in it. It's meant to be primarily a reference document for you. This talks about one of the items I just told you about. A core element I want you to take out of this class, which is you always have an agenda for a meeting. It's not worth doing an agenda. It's not worth having a meeting. People sometimes want just to get together and talk, and with no agenda. And my experience has been those meetings are typically a waste of time. And with no agenda, no defined outcome, why are we doing this? And then you'll see having a back pocket solution and backup plan. We'll talk about that. And then here are some notes about agendas, about what how you keep meetings manageable. A lot of people want to be, let's involve everybody in a meeting. And as the number of people in a meeting go up a little bit, the difficulty in getting something done goes up a lot. And so you typically want to keep those down, and you can just say, let's put a dollar figure and everybody's sitting around the table in this meeting. This would be an expensive meeting. How do we include just the people that need to be? Here's items on an agenda to think about. Here's some of the things that you want to do pre-meeting, and I have including what I call is step up and shut up meetings offline, which means that if you have somebody who tends to be very laid back and you need them to step up in a meeting, you're going to call on them, you let them know that, you encourage them about that, tell them it's going to happen, to be ready. And the shut up means you don't go to someone and say, listen, you just overwhelm meetings and tend to take them over, so shut up. You don't say that. What you do is you go to them and say, you have such tremendous input, and you tend to have a very strong, forceful personality, and people respect you a great deal. And if you speak up early on, it tends to shut down a lot of other discussions. So I need to ask you to hold back on participating until others have had a chance to do so. Can I count on you to do that? And that's how you manage those situations, particularly if it's somebody who's at your level or above you in the organization where you can't really dictate to them. And even so, you might still use the same approach. Here are some things to have during a meeting for facilitation, and we'll get into those. And then here's after the meeting and making the rounds and so forth. And so we're going to get into these with the cheat sheet, but this is really meant to be primarily cheat notes for you to take with you, if you so choose, for when you get into a situation where you have to facilitate a meeting, particularly a meeting where you have to present information or where you have to make a decision or solve a problem. You absolutely have to have it coming out. So let's take a look at this cheat sheet quick. You always have an agenda. We've talked about that. We've talked about this second item too. And the subpoints under this what happens before a meeting. And I'm going to suggest to you that a meeting should almost never be the first time key players see whatever it is that you're presenting. So if you're presenting findings from some research you've done, you're presenting a recommendation for something, it's a report out on some work that you've done, whatever it is, you don't want the people sitting around that table to be seeing it for the first time when you present it. Why? Because you need to identify and address major concerns before the meeting. If you go into a meeting and you've missed some things, or people have questions, they raise issues and concerns, maybe things you haven't thought of, or maybe they are, but they don't understand, you lose a lot of time and a lot of agenda, so you want to deal with those things offhand. There's also an ego factor that people like to be consulted and have their thoughts baked into something, particularly if you're doing a presentation or some sort of analysis. Okay, you get to anticipate objections and address them before the meeting. The other part is after the meeting you make the rounds. It's almost like a sort of a corporate, just like a sort of a ritual that you see. The person that does the meeting afterwards goes around and talks to the different players in the meeting, gets their feedback one-on-one, and you do that because there's people who might have objections but are just afraid to, or for whatever reason don't want to raise them during a meeting. Maybe they don't want to embarrass you, maybe they're shy, but you need to smoke out the objections, or you think you'll have accomplished something in the meeting and you won't. The third point here, and the last point, is in particular for meetings where you're going into a meeting and you absolutely have to have a decision made when you walk out of the meeting. Which vendor are we going to take? It could be anything. Which vendor are we going to select? It could be anything, but you absolutely need a decision, or you need a solution or a potential solution to move forward on fixing a problem. Here I'm going to suggest to you something similar to the thought process around delegation, and don't just delegate away and delegate yourself out of a large, highly important, high-profile project that could damage your career if it's not done well. Make sure you involve yourself. Here too, what I'm talking about here is if you have to have a decision made, for example, which vendor are you going to select, and you know that this team has to come up with a meeting, don't count on the team to come to a consensus. They might, most likely they won't. What you would do in this kind of situation is you would vet the decision ahead of time. You would come up with a choice of which vendor. So maybe there's vendor A, B, or C, and C is bad news. You prefer B, but you could live with A. So you could live with A, prefer B, C's out, and you have maybe talked to one or two people that you can bounce that off of, so it's not just your good idea sitting in your office. People that would know, that could poke holes in your thinking, and make sure you've got a viable decision before you walk into the meeting. Now you go into the meeting, you facilitate the meeting, and if the team comes and the group comes up with a solution, and you can try to you critically look at it and you can vet it and it works, that's great. Okay. And in my scenario, as long as they come up with C, you keep asking questions until you bring out the reasons why that's bad. If it's you prefer B, but they want to do A, and you can live with A, you go with A, because then you get the buy-in and they're okay with it. But if you get to a point where the team says we just can't come to a consensus, then you lay out your potential solution and say, well, if we can't come to any other decision, here's one viable decision we can make, and then you can work through that and basically say, look, if you have a better idea or other decisions, let's come up with it, or poke holes in this. Otherwise, this is the solution we're walking out of here with, because we are walking out with a solution. Similar to solving a problem, in that you have a solution in your back pocket ready to go. Now, hear me, this is not about trying to manipulate the group to get to what you want. If you have only one answer and it has to be it, better off to say the decision's mine, here's what I'm thinking about, here's your opportunity to influence the decision, go. All right? Be honest with people. Don't try to get them to the right answer. It's terrible. But I had a boss who was the president of a company. He talked with me about a key decision that had to be made. He walked me through the logic of what he had done. We refined it. We changed things a little bit. He went into a meeting with the group, and the group came up with a different solution, and he was okay with it. We asked the similar questions, and it was another viable choice. He went with it to get the group's buy-in. Nobody around that table except me had any idea that he had an alternative solution there in his back pocket. If your team comes up with a solution that can be stress tested and it works, they will never know other than the one or two people that you may have shown it to and to get feedback on and to help you work it through. They will never know that you came in with a potential decision or with a solution. They don't need to know that. It's not about getting your way. It's about getting to a solution and making sure you have a plan B, so that if you need a decision made out of that meeting or you need a solution made coming out of that meeting to march forward, you've got one that you can put on the table for discussion and tweaking if it makes sense. And if they want to make changes that don't fundamentally change what you're doing, that's great, get their buy-in, but you walk out of the meeting with a decision made or problem solved in the direction to go. And so that's what this is all about. So now that's really what I want to say about this. And by the way, this has to do with this has to do more when you're looking at data or analyses or reports that you don't want people to be seeing it for the first time. This is really for decision making and problem solving type meetings. So now let's take a look at the Borough Bank Innovation Group meeting we talked about last time in light of this, and this will set us up for our discussion board for the coming homework for the coming week. If you remember last time, if you watched the solution to the last discussion board or the debrief, we are going in with Paul, you as Alex are going with Paul to a innovation group meeting. You have some a new product idea, you've met offline with the appropriate people, and you have a great meeting and get it passed. We had a script or a role play that went with that. And in this role play, we saw all these different things, and we got to a place where we said, maybe you start with Sarah, ask would she buy into it. If Vikram and Muhammad are on board, go to them, say Sarah's on board. If you are, work with them, loop with Penny, and back to Sarah, and away you go. So the question here is, in the context of the meeting management principles I've just showed you about, how would you actually engineer this and do this? Which brings us to the discussion board homework for the week. I am back under case studies for discussion boards. Under Borough Banks, I put all these Borough Bank extra exercises under Borough Bank. And here is, and the material for Borough Bank group exercises. And you come down here, and here's meeting management and the FinCom issue. And that's what we're looking at. So let me click on that. And what you do is you see this document. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, first of all, ignore all the columns 2 through 5. This can also be used as a group exercise. We're just doing column 1 here. We're not going to get a group consensus, just column 1. What you see here is 8 steps that you would go through to use the meeting management principles we just talked about, these principles, and apply them to what we talked about you want to do in terms of managing this new product that you and Alex want to roll out. And so to do that, here are the 8 steps, but they are not in order. And your charge is going to be to put them in order, the order of what action steps you would take at what times in order to execute what we've just talked about and apply the meeting management principles. So for example, if you thought step 3 was the first step, you would put a 1 here. And if you thought this was the next step, you would put a 2 here, and so forth. So you're just ordering these 8 steps in the logic order you would use to execute on that process we just talked about. And then I will show a sample solution next time. And again, just this first column. Have fun with this. This is extremely valuable information and extremely valuable technique for you to use.